So I'm here with Jim Hibbard from CNY Central New York Refrigeration and Design, and Jim's been designing and putting rinks in all over the country for probably 20 years. And so we put together a little talk here. I kind of threw together some slides today based on what Jim and I had been talking about, plus the questions you guys had submitted. And so we're just going to walk through this, and you guys should be able to, I don't know, you guys are muted right now. So if you have any questions, I think I'd have to see if I can unmute you all. So if you have any questions, raise your hand, and then I'll figure out how to handle this. Right now, Dan's not here tonight, so I'm kind of operating on my own. So let's go. So first, this is basically what we're going to cover tonight. Trying to cover all the things that we think would be beneficial to not only you that were here and ask questions, but other people that might review this at some later date after it's been recorded. And so I noticed in all the questions, one of the things people wanted to know about were what were some of the parameters that exist in ice shed, relative humidity, and temperature. And so yesterday morning, we did a training for ice makers on this whole topic. I grabbed a couple slides from that. I actually will send you guys a link to that training once it's up and posted. But for starters, this is sort of the overall goals for the ice maker. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Most of this information comes from 4 different sources. And I can tell you, every rink is different. So here are some parameter ranges, and Jim and I were just talking about this, and Jim would say 50 to 65% relative humidity. You know, air temperatures are anywhere from 35 to 50, depending on what club you're in. It really varies, okay, from club to club. Ice surface temperature, again, pretty much between 23 and 25, dew point under 29, but not lower than your ice surface temperature, because if it is, you'll start evaporating your ice. These are some of the things that the World Curling Federation indicates that ought to be monitored. And the reason all these are important that we're sharing these with you right now is because a lot of these relate to what's going to happen as we talk about refrigeration systems and other things that go in your ice shed. Now, most clubs don't monitor all these things or record them. Most will record air temperature, relative humidity, and something to do with their ice pad temperature, either through their brine supply, a brine return, or a probe in the end. This is just a photo of various temperatures in a rink in Ontario, a friend of mine sent me. And this is in the slides that we used yesterday, and you'll be able to take a look at those more detailed through that activity. But basically, this is monitoring many of those things that the World Curling Federation wants you to monitor, and it records it using this system. Next, refrigeration. So Jim, I thought this was a good place to start to just talk a little bit about what's the basics for a refrigeration system. This is one I just pulled off the web. I know it's not exactly the same as maybe some, but if you could just start to talk to people about just the key elements in a refrigeration system so that we can make sure that it may not be important to the people that are on this call, but it could be important for people who listen in at some later date.
Okay, well, this system that you've displayed here is actually a brine system. You can see on top of the chiller, there's a small circle above the chiller barrel. Well, that's called a surge bottle. And that is so you don't surge ammonia back to the compressor. You would never see that on a Freon-based system. The systems we're using today are running mostly R404. Some of the train chillers are starting to run R513. They're all online gases, and they'll be around for a long time. But this is basically the our package, we use scroll compressors now on almost everything.
It's a type of coolant.
And but otherwise, you're showing sprayers in your condenser. Well, that's no longer used for curling. We would never use that. You would use direct condensation just through an air-cooled condenser, because nowadays with water, the state gets involved, and you have to monitor the quality of your water, and you have to spend upwards to anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500 a season just for water treatment. And you have to pay an outside contractor to do it because you have to report it to the state in many states. So that's not the best way to go. You run in the winter, so it's very easy to get good condensing temperatures for your application. And with this, we use ECM motors on the condensers. They're very quiet, and they run based on your head pressure, so they're super efficient. The chillers we supply typically have the pumps in the chiller. If it's a J&M, if it's a Train, it's separate. Train thinks that their pump systems are made of gold because it's $25,000 additional to put a pump in the chiller. And the other ones, we're running about 8 to 10 for the pump side. But this is a good illustration, and it shows you what you need. Freon 20 is out. That's no longer in use.
Can you just talk about what each one of these components does for not too long, just a short description of?
Okay, the compressor compresses a low pressure hot gas, warm gas, into a high pressure hot gas. And when it goes in, it's a hot gas, it then transfers to the condenser. The condenser will blow air through it, or water, whichever, to lower the temperature of the gas in the vessel. When it gets below the dew point of the gas, it condenses back into a liquid, and it's then shunted to the receiver. When it's in the receiver, before it goes into the chiller barrel, it will go through an expansion valve. That's just a very small orifice. It'll be like 175 pounds on one side of the orifice, and it'll be 30 pounds on the other. As that gas expands through that orifice, it absorbs heat, and it creates the refrigeration effect. And then it's brought back to the compressor. The compressor's pulling it low pressure, so it sucks the gas back into it and recompresses it. And it's just a closed loop system. And that's how any refrigeration system works. Water can be used for refrigeration if you want to cool to 212 degrees. Your secondary refrigerant is propylene glycol. That goes through your chiller barrel, and then goes through from the chiller. It goes through from the pump. It's pumped through the chiller barrel, and then to the floor. Refrigerates the floor. Comes back into the reverse return header. Of course, reverse return is only used if you're using 4 or more sheets, and then it goes back into the chiller barrel, and it's recooled. And there usually be anywhere between a 2 and 6 degree delta T across your floor, depending on the size of your chiller, the speed of your glycol, and the actual load on the floor. Ammonia is quite popular in rural areas, but it's almost twice as expensive as the Freon system. Carbon dioxide is a new system out there, and they work when they work, but when they don't, you're done. You're out of business. The Freon-based systems that are out there that we've been using for many years with the new gases, they're quite reliable. They're very efficient, and they do a nice job. And your secondary refrigerants, primarily with the newer chillers, we're using ethylene or propylene glycol. Brine is kind of going by the wayside because when brine gets older, it tends to develop chromium properties, and it makes it something that you can't get rid of. It's very expensive to get rid of if you ever make a move or have to change anything. Propylene glycol is supposedly very environmentally friendly compared to ethylene glycol. They're both good. They have good properties, but propylene glycol has a viscosity shift as the temperature drops. So it goes from a very thin material to a much thicker material as it gets closer to the freeze point of the glycol and the water mix. Ethylene glycol has almost no shift in its viscosity through the range of temperatures that we operate. The thing that always confused me about these two secondary refrigerants is when we send them back to a company and they are going to get rid of them, they do this. They get rid of them the same way. They throw them down the drain. But that's basically about everything on this page. And if anybody has any questions, we can be glad to answer.
So I would say put questions in the chat, all right? Because
Yep.
I can't technically figure out how to unmute all of you. So,
Okay.
and I'll work on that. But Jim, what's the difference between having 2 or 3 headers?
The only difference, if you have 2 headers, typically if you have a 3-sheet club, you'll have 2 headers. Okay, if you have a 4-sheet or a 5 or 6-sheet or even up to 8-sheet, you would have a 3rd header, which is called the reverse return header. And what happens is you feed the glycol in at one end and you return it from the other end. So when it's returning from the other end, you have to make a U-turn to bring it back out. So you just have 3 pipes is all. But what it does is the more tubes you have and the longer your header, in order to get a balanced flow through this floor, you feed it let's say the front side, the entry side, and then you return from the far side. This way you have equal pressure at every tube. Because the first one in is the last one out, the last one in is the first one out. So everything is balanced and they do a great job. Almost all big rinks like hockey rinks and big curling clubs all use reverse return headers. And we do them on anything over 4 sheets.
Okay.
But the main advantage with a bigger sheet is you get more balanced flow. With a 2-sheet or a 3-sheet, you don't really need it. You can get along very well without it. Okay?
Yep, sounds good. Let's go to the next slide. And we can talk about refrigeration needs per location.
Yes. These are kind of rule of thumb things that we've been using over the years. We've actually come into places like the Belfast, Maine Curling Club had 3 sheets and they had a 5-ton chiller. The weakness of a chiller so small is it took them a month to make their ice. So the more horsepower you have, the faster you can make it. But you don't need to make it fast. You need to make it good. And to make it good, you just need, like anything down south, we use 10 tons per sheet. Our chiller usually gives them a little bit of redundancy. Plus, they easily make ice within the week or 2 parameter that they need, and they don't waste a lot of money making ice. And 7 tons per sheet is anything, say, from here down into northern New Jersey, I would use 7 tons. Then you get below Mason-Dixon, of course, like it says, you go to 10 tons. Above I-90, like Minnesota and upstate New York, up around the Adirondacks, and Montana and all that, you can get away with 5 tons per sheet. We usually will end up with 6 or 7 by the time we're finished. Because we also, when I spec a chiller for a club that's going into a rental space, I really like to know what their future holds for them. Because if you buy a chiller now that's a little bigger than you need, it's not going to work anymore and it's not going to cost you any more to operate it. But when you go to move, if you need to buy another chiller, you just bought a piece of change that you didn't need to spend. And the chiller you have that you can't use anymore, you'll never get your money out of it. So if we try to build you so that if you do expand, you've got enough horsepower for the expansion and you don't have to worry about it. We did that with Fort Wayne. We gave them a 50-ton chiller for 3 sheets. A couple of years ago, they expanded to 4 sheets. We went out and did the expansion, hooked it all up. They make great ice. They love it.
So what's the life cycle? So people are planning for the next period of time. Is the life cycle 15 years, 20 years on a compressor chiller system?
The design life on our chillers is 22 to 28 years. And it's all a lot of it's based on maintenance. I've got chillers out there I have a chiller I had one in Whitestown, New York that was 40-something years old. And it was working good. It was an old reset package. It wasn't quite as efficient. So we changed it over to a scroll package and it saved them a lot of money. So basically the floors, I have a floor here that's was put in 1984 and it's still there and no problem with it. And we did Utica pipe floor, but we did that in 96. But most of them are holding up very well. They're quite durable. And they'll outlast your chiller. They're easy to repair. If you have a fitting problem, it's easy to fix the fittings. And tubing is an easy correction if you have a leak, which is rare. Usually, the only time we see a leak is if somebody drops something on a pipe or something, or they get out there and somehow they're working around the hatch with a scraper. And I had a guy in Traverse City, Michigan, get a drill out to drill out his hatch, drilled right through a tube. So he had to get a hot water hose and melt all around it, shut his pumps down, and pull it up, and then fix it and put it back down, and then he was good to go. But those are the kind of things, the only things that cause trouble.
So 2 questions. One is, can you explain what are ton units? So when we talk 10 tons per sheet, what's that mean compared to 5 tons per sheet? So what do those ton units mean?
A ton is 1 ton of refrigeration is 12,000 BTUs. So if we have 5 now, in our ton, now there's tonnage is most often based on comfort cooling, which is a 44-degree saturated suction temperature. So for what we're looking to do, we're running around 5 degrees. It's exactly half. So if you buy, for example, if you're going to put in a 4-sheet rink, we would spec you no less, depending on where you are, than a 60-ton chiller. That'll give you 30 tons of refrigeration, and that would be 7 tons per sheet. Okay, a 60-ton chiller, because when you go to a manufacturer and you order a chiller, you're ordering it in nominal tons. And then you tell them to design it for a certain operating temperature, and then that tells you what your tonnage is going to be. But for our application, it's very nice because it's simply about half what a nominal ton is. So a 40-ton chiller will be 20 for ice making. Okay?
So then the question I had was, so in our club, I can't remember what we had. I think we had like 215 or maybe 215-ton or 210 tons, but we had like 2 compressors, right?
That's correct. Each
So
compressor was a
tonnage. We broke it into 2, partly because of what you noted earlier in the conversation was you need a lot of tonnage to make your ice in the fall, but you need way less to maintain it going the year. So we split it so that we'd bring on the second one we were making ice, only have 1 going during the season. We switch them on and off. So is that really the way you want to go when you think about you're buying, if you need 40 tons for your whole arena?
The rink you had 20 tons, for example. So you had 2 10-ton compressors, 10 horsepower motors probably driving them. So they probably were 20. How many sheets did you have?
4.
4 sheets. So you probably had 2 20 horsepower compressors, which would give you 40 nominal tons, but it would be 20 tons at your application, about 5 tons per sheet. And one of them would do the job quite fine during the season, but occasionally when it got warm out, that second compressor would come into play if it was set up properly. Today, we use all smaller compressors and we stage them up and down. This way, you don't have nearly the energy load that you would if you were running too big of a compressor and you're not cycling one machine off and on a lot like you are with 2 bigger machines. So you don't want to have a machine big enough to do the whole job and then shuts off, because then you could have a short cycling issue. And if you have a demand power meter, you're paying for demand fees, which can be as much as your usage. But today, it's mostly smaller compressors, like say an 80-ton chiller, which would be for a 6-sheet club. We would typically have 4 20-horse compressors in that unit. And this way, one quite often carries the load if it's down near 0 or 10 degrees out. And as the ambient comes up, then they'll cycle in as needed.
And your chiller tonnage has to be equal to your total compressor tonnage?
Well, no, your compressor tonnage, it all depends on your operating parameters of your chiller, which is the suction temperature of the chiller, or your leaving glycol temperature. If you want your glycol to be 50, if your design is for 15 degrees, for example, leaving glycol temperature, which is your lowest point. This is where you would go when you first make your ice. Say 15 degrees, you're going to have a 5-degree saturated suction. Your suction temperature is going to run 10 degrees below, typically 10 degrees below your operating desire. Okay? And that's where your tonnage is based off of, is the lowest point you typically expect it to operate. And this way they can rate the tonnage based on that factor. So a chiller typically, because of the efficiencies of the new chillers, say an 80-ton chiller would be 45 or 46 tons. And that's based on an 80-degree evaporator, a condensing temperature. We're running in the 70s range, so we're really more efficient than that. So you're getting a lot more for a lot less, and you're not spending the money to run the chiller.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep. Let's move on.
Okay.
So you talked about these two refrigeration systems, ones that you primarily have been using.
Yep. I love it, but the Train is so proprietary. I almost hate to see clubs use it, because if you have a problem with it, you have to call Train. You can't just call any tech to come out and work on it, because the guy has to come with a laptop to diagnose the problem. And they're very proprietary in their parts and anything else. They can be quite pricey down the road if you have problems with them. Whereas the JM Fluidics that we've been using for the last few years, we've used quite a few of them because they're not proprietary. Any technician can diagnose a problem with them. And anything you need in the system, any refrigeration parts you need, you can buy at your local refrigeration store like Ferguson, R.E. Michael, even Granger might have some of it. But the big process manufacturers, the companies that supply these things, they have the materials to, the parts that you'll need. Plus the J&M Fluidics chillers, every circuit is an individual circuit. So if you have problems with one compressor, you don't lose half your chiller. With a Train, a York, or a Carrier, they're assembled in pairs, and if you lose one compressor, you actually lose two. So you're running on half your chiller. During the winter, cold weather months, that's fine. But it's nice to, if you lose one, you don't even notice it until you say, oh, wow, that one hasn't been running. What's going on? But usually you'll get alarms that'll tell you on them that what's happening. But you don't lose half your package because you've got to work on one circuit. They're 4-circuit instead of 2-circuit. And that's one of the reasons we've been getting away from them. Plus, they're considerably cheaper. And right now, a Train chiller, the delivery time frame, the lead time is 45 weeks. So if I ordered a chiller today, I couldn't get it until next August, September.
And one other question, just going back, I should have asked this earlier. Brine Pumps.
Yep.
So we were in a 4-sheet, we had 2 Brine Pumps.
Yep.
Does that make sense? I mean, this was
Yes.
designed in 2000, but okay, probably.
How I would usually do, if I put a Train chiller in, I would go to Ace Pumps and I would order 2 pumps for that chiller. One pump would be about 25% more than the minimum flow of the chiller, and 2 pumps would be maximum flow. This way, if you had a pump issue, you could fix it and you weren't out of business. You were wounded, but you weren't out of business. Now, the J&Ms, I can get them with 1 or 2 pumps, and they lead lag, so you don't have any problems with that. It's a little price, adds a little bit to the price, but it's not outrageous. And you have 2 pumps, but only one of them typically runs. But 2 pumps is not unusual. There's nothing like a little redundancy when you got, say, 4 sheets, you got 8,000 square feet of ice. You'd like to be able to keep it up if you have a problem with something, right?
No, that makes sense. I was at a club last spring visiting, and I spent most of the time in the compressor room with the ice guy, while one of the guys was pulling out a brine pump that had just burnt out that morning, and they were going to take it down and have somebody fix it within 24 hours, but they were going to be okay for a day or 2 days running on the same one, but they weren't going to be out of business.
Now, if you have even if you have 1 pump, if you have some sort of a problem, power failure, or something happens in the building, if you turn your pumps off and you don't let the building warm up any more than possible, that ice will last a day or 2 before you even start to notice anything happening with it. Because with the pumps off, it's got to melt from the top down, and that's a slow process. Okay?
Yep. Good to know. Good to know.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the next one. So my experience is with kind of a traditional base. We actually had a sand base where I was, And my understanding was that there was a sand and gravel floor underneath that. I think there might have been a liner, then some insulation, and then a bunch of sand that we had put on, and we embedded the pipes in the sand.
That's correct.
And then I think that's pretty much was true 20 years ago. If you put down a concrete slab, you would have had insulation below it, probably a liner, and the whole thing would have been sitting on sand or gravel compacted.
That's correct. Well, traditionally, most of the clubs that we help out are going into rental spaces. So they already have a concrete floor. And we have discovered that it's quite a bit more efficient not to do sand, because now we use a white liner and our mats are all white. So you don't have to paint the ice.
So let me go to the next slide, but I just want to say, it seems to me like if you were building a new building, we're almost at the point where you could just put in a concrete floor. Don't worry about embedding pipes in it, okay? And just
we did it in Cape Cod, put it all in concrete.
Yeah. So explain what you do with the mats and the base on top of a concrete floor, so that when I walk away from here, we'll have a good understanding of what's actually going to be there. And what's the difference between a liner and a membrane, if there is a difference?
Okay, we put down an existing floor. We start out with the box. You're going to have a framework around your ice, correct? So once you've got your box set up, then we fit insulation into the box. We put 2 to 3 inches, depending on how long your season's going to be and what you want to do. But when we put the first layer of insulation down, then we put down a 6 mil liner. And then we put the next layer of insulation down. And then when we put the insulation down, we use an insulation that has foil on both sides of it. And we tape every seam in the insulation. Then we lay down a 6 mil liner, and then we roll out the mats. And this way you've got control of everything, and everything is pure white. The mats, the liners, everything. Then when we get the catwalks and everything is all ready for you to make ice, and we're all hooked to the chiller, we start the chiller and you start making ice. Now, the beauty of this is your tubes are in the ice. You're not chilling any sand. You don't have 2 inches of sand and then an inch and a half of ice. You got 1.5 inches, 2 inches of ice with the tubes in it. So any temperature changes, the response is much quicker, and it's easier to make ice. You don't have 3 inches of ice in sand. You got just 2 inches of ice. And every inch of ice that you have, it's pretty much a geometric climb as to the cost. Say 2 inches cost you $1, 3 inches cost you $4, and 4 inches cost you $6, and 5 will cost you $10. It's just a geometric climb as your ice thickens.
So that makes sense to me in terms of you forego the sand because you've got the layers of insulation. So
That's
let me
correct.
just go back to, are liners and membranes the same thing?
Yeah, some clubs, Fort Wayne, Indiana, put a roofing membrane under the liners. They did it themselves. It was a lot of work. And I don't know if there was that much benefit to it or not, but they did it. They owned the building and they wanted to do it, so that's what they did. But typically we put a 10 mil liner. We get them from nice rinks, and they're tear proof. They're not, you can cut them, but they're very tear resistant. They're very durable. And that's why we put them between the sheets of insulation so that nothing will hurt them if you do get water through it. And then we put a 6 mil on top. Actually, the 6 mils in the middle, we put the 10 mil on top. And this way you have a lot of durability at the top, and you're just protecting everything and keeping the water contained.
So then I got one question here from Rick Nasman. And so Rick, if you can put in the chat a response to my question, which is, he was concerned about if you need heat below the floor to prevent frost. And I'm wondering, Rick, do you mean frost between the concrete and possibly the insulation? Or are you talking about frost on top of the ice?
No, permafrost he's talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, permafrost is under the insulation. If your club operates typically in a 6-month season, you will have very little issue with permafrost. But if you're going to go 9, 10, or year round, you've got to put subfloor heat in. And when we put subfloor heat in, then that requires sand to cover the subfloor heat mat. Okay, and what you do is you maintain your subfloor heat mat with typically you can use a 10-gallon or 20-gallon hot water tank, and you just keep that loop at 35 degrees in the floor, 35, 40 degrees, so it doesn't impact your ice, but you also don't freeze the floor, the subfloor.
Okay. I think
Okay.
that takes care of that.
Yep. Yeah, the subfloor heat is, if you're a 6-month club, you would never need it, but I tell clubs we can get some temperature monitors and put them in the subfloor, and you can monitor it. Say it gets near the end of the season and you're having a really good year and you want to operate for an extra month or two. If your subfloor temperature is 35 degrees, you can do it. You could let your subfloor go down to about 27, 28 degrees before you got to start thinking we better get this ice out. Okay?
Yep. All right. Mat systems. So,
Well, we have a from Evelyn there too. She wants to know what the level has to do with. Did you see it?
yep. How much of the
It-
level for the
Yeah.
concrete subfloor becomes a problem?
If you've got a higher low of an inch, you're okay. You can have an inch variation. It's not going to impact your play that much. You probably won't even notice it. When we did the National Capital Curling Center at the Potomac Curling Club, they poured the curb at the header end 2 inches lower than the curb at the warming room end. So when we got all finished, that floor sloped almost 2 inches from one end to the other. And there was nothing we could do about it at that point. So we rolled the mats out, we made ice, and nobody knew. It played very well, and nobody ever said a word about it. I was shocked. But they're very happy with what they've got down there, and then one end of in fact, they're talking about going concrete, I think.
So there are things that you can do as an Iceman,
Yep.
all right? Because people do,
Yep.
in the past, you would have a sand floor that possibly would be lower at one end than on the other. And so when you be putting your ice in, you might flood one end first, fill it up a little bit, keep filling it up more and more until you finally keep getting level going all the way back down to the far end. And what that would
Yes.
mean is your ice pad might be an inch at one end and an inch
Yep.
and 3/4 at the other, all right?
That's correct.
So
Yep.
that's one way that you could fix that problem. If
Make
it's
your ice
not that way, I mean, you can there's ways to kind of fix it. It just makes your installation probably a little bit more challenging at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, you have to know where your low spots are so you can go out there and fill them first. Let them freeze and then build your ice over your low spots. Because if you're not careful and you just keep flooding the whole sheet, you just build your high spots. You end up with a bush.
And actually, to a certain degree, if you're moving into or agreeing to lease in a rental situation, you'd probably want to have some idea about how level and how out of level
Exactly.
that floor might be, which would require, if you've got
Another
somebody in
thing-
the club that is a builder or surveyor, they could come in with a theodolite or a laser level, and you can kind of go around and determine a map. You can make a map of your floor.
Yeah, we recommend that everyone does that that's going into a rental space. When Jim and I go in to look at us, because we like to go in and see where you're building, what you're looking at. And if it's a bad spot, we'll tell you. If it's a good spot, we'll tell you that too. But yeah, you have to know what your floor is before you start. If it's 2.5 inches difference, you're gonna have to put sand in underneath your insulation, or have the landlord build the floor up so that it's flat. Okay.
Yep. So you mentioned in an email you sent me about the CalMac was easier to move, both in terms of kind of manpower, but there was also something you put in there about having to drain the individual pipes.
If you have to move with an ISS system, that is built tube by tube. There is a header, but each tube has to be installed in the header as you build it. And when you move that, you have to take it apart the same way, because that entire floor is not, the tubing is not connected by anything except those 16-inch squares that you put on the floor. And that is one of the items that makes that very labor intensive. You have to cover your floor with 16-inch squares, and then the tubes push into those squares. And then you connect them to the header and you cut them to fit when you're done, when you got them all down in the floor, and you just move across the floor. If you want to see how an ISS goes in, I believe you can go to the Los Angeles Curling Club and look at their, they had a web page, and you could see their floor going in, and you could see they had about 15 or 20 people out there every day putting that floor together. Now, if you have to move, you're going to have to do the same thing the opposite way. You're going to have to get the glycol out of the tubes. You're going to have to pull every tube, all those squares. All your protections for your floor are going to have to come out. You're going to move, and then you're going to go through the same thing, putting them back in. With an ice mat, the beauty of them is the tubes are all tied together. They have spacer strips every 15 inches. You can roll that mat up, get as much glycol out of it as possible, and then you just put Fernco caps on the end of each header section. You tighten the screws on them, and then the glycol stays in the header. You roll it up, you stand it up, put it on a pallet, and you wheel it into the trailer, move it to the new place, put it back down. The ISS floor takes, I guess, from what I've seen, 2 to 3 weeks to put down. And ours goes down in usually one night, 2 days tops, depending on how many volunteers we have. We have 6 or 8 people. We can do a 4-sheet club in one night, as far as just getting the mats down and laid out. Cape Cod was 3 sheets. We put it down in 4 hours.
So
Okay.
I've been at Mayfield, where they have an ISS system. I've seen the tiles, what they were like, and sort of had a sense of how they put it in. It does have some challenges. They actually had some ISS people come and help them, although they had quite a few volunteers that did it. So
Well,
I'm
they
kind of
had
familiar with
the
that.
ISS. When you they told the LA Curling Club, they told them when they come in, they wanted 15 to 20 people for 20 days.
Okay, that's quite a lot.
Yeah.
So then,
But for us, all we need is for when we do with the floor, for example, the insulation. If we have 8 or 10 people or 12, whatever, it just makes the insulation go down faster. The liners and the insulation all get laid out. Then when we do the mats, we need about 6 or 8 people, and that just takes a few hours. So you don't wear anybody out or kill them doing it. You don't have to. With volunteers, you'll start with 25 people the first day. You'll have 10 the second. You'll have 4 the third, and then you'll have those same 4 for the rest of the job if it takes too long.
So then Rick had another question. Does anyone remove mat systems annually?
No. Nope, they put them down and they just leave them. I don't know if anybody, I used to have a rink up in Norwood, Norfolk, New York that had Iceman 1, which was 5/16 tubing and 1 1/4 inch centers. They were pairs, and they used to roll them up every year, but they were only 4-foot sections. They'd roll them up and throw them over the side of the boards and then use it for summer activities. But you don't want to do that with a curling club because that's a whole different ball game. But the mats roll up, and when you roll them,
cost.
Okay. Yep.
So people had a number of cost questions. Some people wanted to know overall what's a whole system cost. You would.
Well, typically,
and to me,
it depending on what the club is looking for, there's a lot of freight involved in this one, but I just did a quote for the Anchorage Curling Club, and for them to go 4 sheets, it was $339,000. And that included a chiller, an ice mat. They provided their own insulation. They have an insulation supplier up there that's dirt cheap. I can't touch it. Glycol, a dehumidifier, installation, liners, pipe and fittings, miscellaneous hardware, expansion tanks, and then we got like lodging, all that stuff fits in, lodging, airfare, rigging, incidentals, labor, and vehicle rental and freight. And then on top, when we get done, that's all my expenses. And then we just add, I don't put a profit line in. We add 15% overhead on the cost of doing business.
And when you talk about a chiller price, or when you talk about a chiller price, you're talking about the chiller, the compressors, the condensers,
That's right.
the brine pumps, all of that.
The complete package, pumps,
Okay,
chiller, everything. When we bring it out, you got your refrigeration packages in one unit. It's maybe 14 feet long by 8 feet wide by 4 feet high. And it's a complete package. When we get finished, you're curling. And there is no such thing as cost overruns with us. If we quote you a price, that's what we do it for. Okay, and I have an incidental item in the line. That's for things that the club forgot. And typically, in Belfast, Maine, we didn't use all of that. And I gave it back to them at the end. I gave them like a $3,500 check because we didn't spend it. And that was put in there for a reason, and I gave it back to them. And any clubs that don't have a lot of changes or anything, we try to give them some of that back. Also, we have so far had good luck helping clubs out. If a club is $40,000, $50,000 short, we have carried a bit of that paper and they have to make payments every year for say 5 years. And we only work at 3% simple interest. So it's only calculated once a year.
All right. Dehumidification.
Yes, it is getting to be very expensive, and the lead time on dehumidifiers is through the roof right now. It's at 3 to 6 months. But a typical, for a 4-sheet club, 7.5-ton dehumidifier, direct expansion, is going to be installed. It's going to be about $35,000. And the reason for that is I don't have a license in your state probably, to install that. So I hire a local contractor. And the cost of that, some of that comes out of the incidental charge number that I put in there. If it varies, if it's inexpensive, it's great. Like I did one in Buffalo, it only cost me $2,500 to have it installed. But I did one in not Fort Wayne, but I did one in Traverse City, Michigan, and the guy told me it cost him $20,000 to have it installed. So I ate it, but I know that was an insane number.
So usually the people I talk to kind of lean away from the vapor compression one and use piston because of the temperature issues.
That's correct. And if you're staying over 42 degrees, they will work okay because the drains won't freeze. And they do the job okay, because you're in a closed envelope. The biggest thing is you want to make sure you're not bringing in any outdoor air. That's the whole thing. Now, desiccant dehumidifiers are wonderful. They're the Cadillacs of dehumidification, but they're almost double what a DX unit is. And they're noisy, so you have to put them outdoors or in a separate room. I have a desiccant unit I bought for the Buffalo Curling Club, and they didn't like the noise. So I had to eat it. I put a DX unit in and I brought that home and put it in the warehouse, and it's sitting there right now doing nothing because I don't have any place to use it. It's 480 volts and it's just sitting there. And it was very expensive. So, but if you put them outdoors and you duct sock them, they're really a nice application. We put a DX unit in Kansas City last December, January, and they've been pretty happy with it. We put a 7.5-ton in, they duct socked it, and it worked real well. They're very happy with it. But again, it's all temperature maintenance in the building. If you let your ice shed go below 40 degrees, now they start to struggle.
Okay. And we had 2 in the club I was in, desiccant ones. They were small.
Yep.
And
very small, but
high and seemed to work fairly well and not too noisy.
Yep.
But I've been in another club where I'm pretty sure they had a desiccant one there on a sock, and the noise irritated people so much that they always left a hockey stick by it so that you could reach up and turn it off. So,
Yep. That's exactly what happens to them. Those real small ones are rather quiet. I have 2 small ones here that I used in a place just temporarily, and then I brought them home. For example, 100 CFM dehumidifiers is about $3,500. Well, it was $3,500 when I bought them, but a 1,000 CFM unit was $22,000. And then a DX dehumidifier moves 4,000 cubic feet a minute. There's 4,000 CFM, and it works pretty well. So you're moving 4 times as much air. But it's all in how much moisture you have in infiltrating the building and things like that. If you're doing a lot of flooding, yeah, it could be an issue. But if you're not, you're doing just your normal pebble, it really keeps up, because most of the time the building's empty. You're only in the building 6 to 8 hours a night.
So let's talk about heaters for a minute, and then Dan Gerlach's got a question. We can go back to that before we move on to the next slide.
Sure.
So heaters, I've seen a range of heaters in clubs. The one I was in, we were using basically some industrial heaters that you would see in like a warehouse or a workshop.
Problem with those is it's very difficult to control where the air is going. So you have no idea, it's hard to deflect that air so it doesn't hit the floor, because if any of that moving air hits the floor, it scallops the ice. It dehydrates it. You'll get ripples because the wind is just sucking the moisture right out of the ice. So it's best to put in something that you can duct. If you can get duct work on it, use horizontal discharges and make sure it doesn't hit your floor, you're fine. And the biggest thing is to size it to give you 40, 45 degrees and not cost you a fortune to do it.
I would say airflow, not to get too deep into this at the moment, okay, but airflow in your building is a real big issue. It's something that most people won't notice, but it can have some influence on your ice at any point in time. You can get localized anomalies. Dehumidification socks, sometimes the way they're set up, will blow on the ice. I was at a club where this one section of the ice, we were waiting for a flood to tighten up, and for some reason, this one section on the one sheet, it just wasn't tightening up until like an hour after everything else was tight as could be. And it seemed to be some airflow coming out of a duct sock from dehumidifiers. So it is, airflow is something you have to pay attention in your building, and especially as you're thinking about going in.
Key thing you can do in your building is before you start, you get a fog machine and you fog the floor. You put about a foot of fog on the floor, and you turn on your air handling units and see what happens. If something moves, then you start moving your ductwork, your diffusers, to stop that. We had to do that in Nashville last year when we put in the T-line curling club. We had to go out there and move all the diffusers because they were all pointing at the floor. And when we got finished, it was fine. Everybody was happy.
So now let's go back to the questions. We've got 2 questions. One from Dan, which basically has to do with, what's the electrical service you need? How much amps?
Well, it depends on your chiller, how big your chiller is, because that's 80% of your electric. 60-ton chiller, you're going to need about 400 amps.
3-phase?
Yes, that's preferable. Yeah, because when you get you start going over 7.5 horsepower, you want to be in 3-phase because the starting load is astronomical, and if you happen to have a demand meter, that'll kill you. So you always go with 3-phase on anything. Any of the larger equipment's always going to be 3-phase.
And then Dan had a question about discussion any issues in running ice in warm climates, California, South Carolina, Florida.
Down south in the southern, we put the T-line curling club in last year in Nashville. It was 105 degrees when we started the chiller, and what we discovered was their building was so tight. They had a foot of insulation in the ceiling, and we put in a low E ceiling, and the walls were well insulated. We put in they said that the engineers wanted to put a 100-ton chiller in, and I said, no, put a 60 in. And we battled back and forth, and finally they succumbed and put the 60 in, and it only ran 2 compressors to make ice. So it worked very well. The whole thing is control of your envelope in the building. If you have no outdoor air getting in and you're well insulated, we can run this anywhere. You can make ice any place. The thing about California is in some southern states where it's much warmer all year, you have to up your tonnage because your condensing temperature tends to run very high. And in so doing, it reduces your tonnage per horsepower of your chiller, okay? The LA Curling Club went out and found a used chiller. I actually helped them find it, and they bought it, and they got a steal on it, but it's an air-cooled chiller, and it does the job for them, but it's much larger than they need. They have 6 sheets, I believe, and they had like a 120-ton chiller. But I would go no less than 10 tons per sheet in Arizona or California, or in fact, I would spec it based on the condensing temperatures. And typically down there would be 115 degrees in those areas. Okay.
The other things you want to keep in mind in those environments are you get a lot of heat from conduction on the building with the sun shining on it and on the roof, all right? And you really want to make sure that you've got a sealed building. Sealed buildings, I mean, a well-insulated sealed building is key, I think, more so in those environments than, say, up in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Partly because then you can control your ice shed to a certain degree. You know, you can reduce the need of dehumidification. You can reduce the need, the presence of airflow, changing temperatures. It makes a world of difference that, and then there's other challenges that go along with it, which I hadn't realized that in North Carolina, when they flood their ice, all right? So generally people put on tap water or DI water that's not heated, all right? You could put on heated water as a last flood to get absolute level. Some people do that, all right? It seems counterindicative, but it just has to do with the properties of water, okay? It'll come to level better if it's warmer than cold. When in North Carolina, this one club actually has this tank with ice in it that they run the piping through, so when they flood, it cools down the water to a normal temperature. Their tap water, after it goes through their DI system, it's so warm if they don't run it through like a little chiller, which basically isn't anything more than a tank filled with ice and copper tubing going through it. So that's one of the odd things about being in a warmer climate, that it has some other qualities or challenges that people up in the north or the northeast don't have. We have some different challenges, but I was kind of surprised to hear that.
Another item in that line is when you make your ice and you're shooting for flood, when you're just making your ice initially, until you cover the mat, you can run it 15 degrees and just get yourself a sheet of ice, get some thermal properties down. Once the tubes are covered, then you raise your mat temperature to 25 degrees. Now, when you go out and flood, that sheet will go flat much faster. And it just takes longer for it to cool down. But the longer it takes to freeze, the more potential for level when you get finished. In those last 5 or 6 floods, you do those with regular old tap water and a 25-degree starting temperature. And then as soon as it freezes, say you do it at 8 o'clock in the morning, you come in the afternoon, if it's frozen, you go right out and hit it again. You end up with a level sheet.
Yeah, we used to do the same thing, Jim. We'd start at 20 degrees and run at 20 and until you got it built up to the point where you're really getting to your final last 3 or 4 floods, and then you could just turn up the heat and let it go. So,
yep.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Operational cost. So, I guess you can just talk about this, Jim. You're the one that put the information here.
It all depends on what your energy costs in the area you're at. Right now, I'm in upstate New York, and I'll tell you, our prices are through the roof right now, and all the rinks are crying right now because their energy costs are up $2,000 to $3,000 a month more than normal. But they're a whole different ballgame than curling. But typically, most of the clubs we're doing, a lot of the smaller clubs are in the $1,000 to $1,500 a month range. 4 sheets are around $2,000 to $2,500, and then when you get into bigger, it's of course the number's going to go up. And your ice depth has a big impact on the cost of your operation. Your ice temperature, indoor air temperature, that if you run 42 degrees, it could save you $200 to $500 a month just on maintaining your ice temperature. And then your insulation in the building, ambient temperature will affect your energy costs because the warmer it is out, the higher the condensing temperatures, the tougher it is to get rid of that heat. Because basically, when you're refrigerating your floor, you're extracting heat from the floor, and you're disposing of it outdoors. If it's 50 degrees out, the chiller's laughing. If it's 100 degrees, it's gagging because it's working like heck. But otherwise, you know, like it says right in the slide, electricity use, kilowatt hours is the gauge, not dollars and cents, because everywhere is different. We have places around here that have, what they're called municipal power. They pay 5 cents a kW for electricity. We're paying 14 cents a kW, and we're paying 12 cents or 14 cents for delivery, which is ridiculous. But it's all based on your area. I think the club in Potomac Curling Club in Washington is, they were around 50, that's 4 sheets, and they were running $1,500 a month when we built them in 2001. So they probably are up around $2,500 now, depending on what they're doing with their package.
So when we had a talk with last time with Craig Fisher, that was one of the things that came up in there was, you know, dollars,
Yep.
It's helpful to know, but because of the variation exists around the country, you really want to know from, if you're going to ask other clubs, you know, what's going on, you want to ask about kilowatt hours. And I'm not clear how many people could give you an answer right off the top of their head. Because if you talk to their financial people, the people paying the bills, they're only worried about the dollars and cents going on. Nobody's keeping track of kilowatt hours. Somebody
Yep.
took me to look at a chiller system in a suburb of Massachusetts. And that was a 2-rink setup, and it was run by a guy that had come out of Draper Labs, which is an offshoot out of MIT. And he had monitors around that rink, okay, monitoring electrical use, kilowatt hours, okay, in about 15 different places, all right, in both the rinks, all right. He knew exactly how much his use was changing at any point in time. He had all these spreadsheets that would, you'd just go silly looking at them. You were like, how can you keep track of this? But this guy, Mr. Gray, he would keep track of it. You know, he knew how much his electricity changed when he switched from R22 to one of the later R gases, Jim. I mean, he knew exactly
Yep.
how much more that was costing him. So you can put in monitors. They, you know, if you really want to know how much electrical use you're using in your compressor systems, you can put a monitor in there that'll collect that data for you, okay? You just got to hardwire it in there, all right? So there's ways
Now,
to monitor that if you need to, but I think
Yeah,
trying to find out kilowatt hours from other clubs will be a bit of a challenge. Go ahead, Jim.
Recently, the Broomstones Curling Club called me, and he wanted to know how come he was costing a little more to run this new chiller package versus the old one. I said, well, for one, I said, you're using a lot more, you're not, but the price is up. But number two, I said, if I'm not mistaken, you started your second dehumidifier, didn't you? And he goes, oh yeah. And that was the thing right there. That second dehumidifier, it had electric regeneration, and that spiked his meter. It's cost him $500–600 a month for that dehumidifier. Now, a lot of the bigger desiccant dehumidifiers use gas regeneration, but if they're using electric, you're talking electric strip heat, 10,000 watt heater strips to drive the moisture out of that desiccant before it comes back around to do some more work. So it's something to consider.
All right, let's go on to the next slide.
KWs are very,
anything we need to. So using volunteers.
Yep.
So it looks like you've had pretty good experience with this.
Yes, we have, of the 30 or so clubs we've done, no one has ever turned down volunteers. And typically I write into my quotes, use volunteer labor, subtract $25,000. Depending on the size of the club. If it's a 6-sheet club, it might be 30, 35. If it's a 2-sheet club, it might only be 15. But it just say, if I don't have to bring only me and Jim, my Iceman, it just saves you a lot of money. And the thing that I like about using volunteers is everybody has questions. They're involved and they're excited because they got a hand in what's going on in the club and they're in the know. And as you know, people love to be in the know. And they have an understanding of how the system works, how it's put together, and we also show them how to make repairs, emergency repairs, and then how to go back later to eliminate the emergency repair to a more long-term repair and things like that, so that everybody that's there has a working knowledge of what's going on. The only thing we don't divulge a whole lot of is chiller operation. We leave that to the club to tell us who has to know, because you don't want everybody with a stopwatch out there adjusting the chiller because he doesn't like the way things are going right now. If you understand, and I'm sure you've all seen that. Some of these clubs, they got people going out and making adjustments. They go home and forget, and it costs them an extra $600 because the guy left the chiller at 2 degrees lower than it used to be, and the ice play was terrible. But that's basically, it really gets the members involved, and it helps a lot because they can answer questions for other people, and they see how it works. Okay.
So Dan Hazlitt, can you unmute people so that we can just let people ask questions if they have them?
Hey, Russ, I think we can unmute ourselves.
Well, if you can. So if people have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up. We have some more time. I would just say that I have this last slide, last thoughts. And we usually have a last thought slide. This is blank because I hadn't talked to Jim beforehand, but I just left it blank. But I think before we go to last thoughts, I'd just like to open this up. And if people have questions about any of the things that Jim has talked about or I've mentioned, I'd just like people to take an opportunity. There are really no dumb questions. So Eric,
The only you don't ask.
Hey, Jim, how you doing? It's Eric with Long Island. How's it going?
Good, Eric.
I just want to start off by thanking you. I've spoken to you probably at least 5 times over the past 3 months as we're trying to get our system together. I guess I'll ask some of the questions that I've already asked you before, but just for everybody else. In terms of relocation, so now you find a spot, you have to relocate now because you're either getting kicked out or you're moving to get something bigger. With the Iceman system, what are you looking at in terms of cost to move out from where you are to now just move all your ice chiller and everything like that to your new building?
Well, it would all depend on the time, really, but you're probably talking, I don't know, it all depends. If you're moving into a bigger building and you didn't buy a bigger chiller, here's the thing. If you buy a chiller to do what you're doing right now you want to move in, say, 3 years, you want to move into a bigger building, you want to add 3 sheets, you want to upgrade your chiller, you want to uptick your chiller.
See, the way to me it would be more if, hey, you decide you're going to go 2 sheets, right? And you squeeze yourself down to a place for a 2-sheet club. You go a few years and you realize, you know what, we're really ready for a 3-sheet club. And now you want to move that 3-sheet club. What kind of costs are you looking at?
If you're just going to move everything, I don't know. I would say it's probably going to take you a week and probably, you got to get our truck. You got to need a rigger to load the mats in the truck. You got to get a rigger to come and lift the chiller and move it for you. You have to have a new pad for the chiller in your new location, so you're going to have to pay whoever your local masonry contractor is and have him pour you a pad. And then we'll have to put new piping from the chiller to the header. The header you'll pretty much all use the same. And if you're going to add a sheet, here's what I was getting at. If you're adding a sheet and things like that we'll put that all in. If we do enough work, if there's enough new equipment going in, for example, 1 or 2 sheets and a few other things, you're going to have glycol, you're going to have more insulation. It'll all be worked in, and whatever those items cost, that'll basically be what it is with about 15% on top of it. So whatever your materials cost plus 15% of it, and that's what we would come down and do it for. We've already built you once, and we're going to do everything we can without hurting you to help you move. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, this is one of the things we do. We do everything we can to help a club get established and get built. And then if they move at some point, we do all we can to help them do the moving. Okay?
Yep. Thank you.
So just to chip in here for a second. So it seems to me that in addition to your moving cost, you're gonna have a mat for another sheet, right? Okay,
You're gonna have, well, it's, if you're putting in one sheet, you're gonna have 3 mats. You're gonna have 2 7-footers and a 1-footer.
yeah.
You'll have 15 feet. You'll have more piping for the header. You're gonna be buying glycol. You're gonna be buying liners. You're gonna have to replace all the liners because as good as they may look, you're better off to replace the liners. You're gonna put insulation underneath the new segment. You're gonna be building new boxes to put your mats in, and then it's all gotta be tied together. So you're probably talking, you know, our cost would probably be around 10,000 total to move you. But the outside things that we don't have a whole lot to, you know, that
Okay.
don't
The regular electrician, the concrete pad then.
exactly the concrete electrician, the concrete pad, the carpenter, unless you build your own catwalks, which many clubs do, and all that stuff. Then if you're going to put a low E ceiling in, say you have a low E ceiling in your club, you want to put it up because your ceiling is you got a black roof and there's not a lot of insulation in the roof. You're going to put a low E ceiling up. Now you got to buy a new low E ceiling or expand the ceiling that you have, and that all costs money too. That's, you know, that's added in there. That's an extra $4,000 or $5,000 for one, just to cover a sheet. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Jim, and thank you for all of your phone calls.
So we've got
Pleasure.
a question in the chat. What are the thoughts on convincing property owners to let us put water in their building?
Well, the thing that we do is we actually can show them pictures of clubs that we've put in and explain to them how we do it. You know, we basically you're putting ice in the building and you control the melt. When you take the ice out, you basically raise your set point to say 30 degrees and you let the ice melt from the top down. And all you have to do is make a provision. And when we build, we'll make a provision where the water can flow to. Then you take a hot water hose and you literally make trails, you know, you cut grooves in the ice with the hot water hose, and they don't have to be big, but right back to your drain point, you put a small pump in there and you let it drain automatically. It's an automatic pump and it just pumps the water out. If you turn it off, the water's going to be there, but we recommend draining from the top down because if you just turn off the chiller, now the ice is going to melt from the bottom. And what happens is you got the weight of all that ice on the water. And if you do have a hole in your liner, it'll shove the water through the liner and you'll have big bubbles underneath it. That happened to Anchorage. They mistakenly made some holes in their liner. And then when they took the ice out the first year, it didn't drain well. And they shut the chiller down complete. And they had water got under the liners. So I sent them up they had it all rolled up trying to get the water out. And I told them, just roll up the liner, vacuum the water off, I'll get you a new liner. And they said, well, how much is that going to be? I said, it's nothing. I'll send you a new liner. I said, I'll eat the liner. We got to make you right here. So that's what we did. We sent them up a liner, they put it down, and it took care of the problem. So
How do you set up a drain point?
Over at the header assembly, you can do it at the header or the return end. You just put a piece of wood in there that you can knock out at the end of the season. Your liner is going to go beyond the return end, so you can drain it from the return end, you know, your header return end. And you just make one spot, and you can easily make it so the water all flows to that point. And then when the ice is all gone and you just got water in between the tubes in places that didn't drain out, you go out with a shop vac and just suck it up if you want, or let your dehumidifier just dry it out.
And are people just draining this outdoors? Or are they draining into the?
Well, they can put it right into the sewer if you want to drain. If you got a drain in the building, in Nashville they had 3
generally, right? So.
And in Nashville they had 3 drains in the floor down at the header end, and we just made it. Any others?
You still there, Jim?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I see the mouse moving, but
Can you hear me?
yeah.
was trying to think of things that come to mind for me at the moment. That we haven't talked about or that we should talk about. But you mentioned something about some boarding that you like to use. FP something around the frame.
Yep, what we use on the around the in Nashville, we used it for the first time and liked it a whole lot. On the sideboard to protect the liners, we bought sheets of FRP, which you get at Lowe's, and we cut it into 8-inch strips or 6-inch, whatever we needed, and we lined the whole sides of the place with it. And we also put it on the edges of along the edges under the liner to protect the liner from the end of the mat spacer strips. And we really had good results with that. And that's a nice addition because it looks really nice. It's shiny. It's very durable because it's fiberglass and it lasts for a long time. And then on the ends, we use usually the club will use boat dock material so that when the stones hit, they don't damage the end boards behind the hacks. When you have a takeout weight, it's a little more takeout than it should be.
So let me ask you another question. So, so you're throwing down basically a bunch of framing, right?
Yep.
2x6, 2x8, 2x12 framing, whatever you need to have on top of a concrete
Exactly.
floor, right?
Yep. A lot of it depends on the side, how much insulation and how much ice and how big a step you want. Typically, it's no less than 2x6, usually 2x8 or even 2x10. Okay.
Yeah. No, and I was in a club where it was probably 2x10s.
Yep.
And it made it really hard to get the scraper on and off the ice. I want to tell you.
Like in Utica, they had about an 8-inch step. And when we finished there, we made a ramp that we could just put right down and the ice boss went right out on the ice, no problem. But yeah, you can make a smaller step. The thing is, you like to have your step onto the ice to be less than 8 inches.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. No, not a problem. I think they ended up deeper than that, but I think part of that was they weren't clear on the front end about what the specifications were going to be for the header pipes and the piping attaching to the headers. So, but it's just something for people to think about.
Yep. If it's a 4-sheet club, you're going to have 4-inch headers. If it's 3 or less, we can go with 3-inch. But if you expand later on, then we have to consider that. And 4-inch, you have to be able to put your catwalk over your header pipe. And we usually trim the support pipes to fit over the header.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody got anything else? Feel free. My phone number is there if you want to call me ever and ask a question. If I don't answer right away, if you leave a message, I'll call you right back as soon as I can. How about you, Mike Garnett? You got any questions? I've been looking at you there for the whole time now. I haven't heard a word out of you.
No, you've covered it very well. Our main considerations were the initial considerations about how large of a compressor, because that's the stage we're at. So you've answered that perfectly. Thanks.
Yep. Well, you know, the thing I'm seeing, and I've seen it for the last 20 years, clubs want to build, but it's always funding. It's always the funding. Very few are as lucky as Anchorage right now. They got ahead. Somebody gave them $500,000. So they want to move out of their 2-sheet facility and go into a 4-sheet. The problem they've got is they've got a sweet deal with the city in their 2-sheet building. And they're trying to find something like that somewhere else in town. But yeah, your chiller sizing there are so many variables, but we take those into account. When we come out and look at your site, we look at your weather patterns and when you're going to run, and we do the sizing from there. We usually try to make it so that you have a little redundancy, easily make ice, and it doesn't overwork your pocketbook to make the ice.
Jim, this is Rick Nasman with Crow Berkshires in Massachusetts. You've given us several quotes over the last several years, which we truly appreciate. With the last one, you noted how the cost, material costs have just skyrocketed. I think you said they've gone up 30, 40, 50% in some cases. Using your crystal ball, do you see those things coming down much, or anywhere near where they used to be, or they're going to come down, 10%, and that's probably where they're going to stick?
Honest with you, I have never seen a chiller or an ice mat price go down. And part of the reason on ice mats, anything to do with plastics, it's not, they're oil price based, but the real expense in plastics is the resins. The resins they use to make them, when they go up, they don't come down. It would be really, it's a wishful thought, but I don't foresee the numbers coming down. I can see them being stable, but I don't see them coming. I know last year, for example, an ice mat for a 4-sheet club was like $26,000. And right now it's $47,000 for that same mat. And that was 2019 versus today. And they've gone up 3-4 times a year. And chillers have been even worse. A chiller that I used to pay $70,000 for is now $126,000. So it's just staggering. I almost hate to write a quote because I just can't stand to look at the prices. It's just so high. And I can't imagine the costs that a regular mechanical contractor that doesn't do this all the time will charge you. And even rink builders, there are other rink builders out there, Davis Mechanical, Becker Rink Products, all those guys, they are considerably higher than we are, usually. And that's okay. But we're hands-on. You don't talk to a guy at Becker Rink that comes to the job and do it for you. That helps you out with it and just leads you through the whole process. And that's what we do. We come out, we're there every.
You're a great resource, and we've appreciated all your input and site visits.
Yep.
Truly appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, we've been there to your place 2 or 3 times now. And anytime anybody has a spot to look for us to look at, we'll go out. I went to LA 3 times and they didn't offer to pay me for going out or anything. They just built it without me after I steered them to all the right resources. They kind of threw us under the bus, which is okay. I don't have a problem with that. That's why we're doing Las Vegas, because they were supposed to help Vegas and they threw them under the bus. The guy wouldn't call them back, wouldn't talk to them, nothing. So they started calling me, and they're just looking for a building now. They've got the money, they just don't have a building.
Yeah.
So
But
any
it's
last
key for us.
thoughts-
Yep.
Any last thoughts on your side, Jim?
Well, the thing is, one thing, if somebody has a site and they have their funding, we would love to help you out, but if we don't, it's okay. You're not going to hurt our feelings if you go another route. That's not a problem. But if you wish, we can come out and look over a site with you to make sure it's the right thing right place to be going into. Okay. I went to Kansas City twice before we built them. And, if it's just part of the process. If we go out and look over a site for you, it's all, it's okay. We take care of it. We just want you to be happy with what you get.
Sounds pretty good.
And we're not the 24 hours or 24 miles, whichever comes first. After we get, we talk to you and we help you out. Okay.
Yeah, no, this has been very helpful, Jim. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think people have found it beneficial. I hope so anyways, but I just want to say, I just want to apologize. We had a few problems getting going here today, but it's all worked out fairly well. You'll get an evaluation from Pete Dellapella. That's his email address on there, PeteDella52@Hotmail. So we send out evaluations on every one of these things we do.
Okay.
And, please fill it in. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you didn't like. If you've got any other ideas you want to share, feel free. If anybody want to reach out to me about anything specifically, you can contact me at either at ice@gncc.org, or you can reply to me at rockpick@gmail. And that's the quickest way to get a hold of me. So that said, please fill out your evaluations. I want to thank you all for signing up, and I hope we can do some more of these in the future. I'm not sure what comes next. I'm trying to line up another club to talk about their experience transitioning, and hopefully I'll be able to do something about that in the next couple of months. So, but I would just say thanks very much for signing in, and I think we can all just log out at this point and we're all good.